Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Back in the 1990s, I used to work as an advertising executive in Baltimore when I lived in New York City every day. The commute was really tiring, but I really enjoyed my job. I would wake up around 6 in the morning, would take the 3 train to Penn Station, and when I arrived there, I would usually catch a 7:15 Amtrak, and the train ride would normally be 2 hours and 15 minutes. I would do this every day without any problems. Only this one day would put a sad end to this streak. It was a Friday morning, and I hopped on a 6:15 3 train like every day. There was no issue so far. Around 6:23, we then arrived at the third to last stop before entering Manhattan, and then we took off from that train station about a minute later. Around 6:26 or 6:27, the train came to a complete stop. I was surprised because trains wouldn't usually stop this early in the morning, as less people took the train at this time. I waited for about 5 minutes before the conductor came on the speaker and said, "We're extremely sorry for the delay. There is an issue going on and we're trying to resolve this ASAP. Thank you for your patience." I was annoyed because I didn't want to be late for work, as my boss would lose his shit if anyone was late. Time kept going by, and now I was on the train for like 40 minutes. Now, I was getting concerned. What the hell could be going on out there? 20 minutes later, the conductor came on the speaker again and said, "We are all so sorry that we're being held here for this long. We're expected to be here for a while now. Thank you for your patience." An hour had already passed by, and everyone in the subway car started to get very anxious and grumpy. And 10 minutes later, I would have the most disturbing moment of my life. Right outside of my subway car, I heard a bunch of gunshots and yelling. Someone must have had intentions of killing somebody. I was so frightened at this moment that I could only sit and wait until the train would move again. Everyone else in the car felt the same way. For like the next 35 minutes, I would hear constant sirens above me. Every police department in the city had to have been called. I would also hear loud talking outside of the car, and I could tell a huge crime scene was going on. Time still flew by, and I was still stuck in the tunnel. Around 8:30-ish, the train finally moved again and everybody cheered happily so loudly. There was still no signals as we were still underground, and we then arrived at the next stop and we were all forced to exit the train as the whole line would be shut down for the remainder of the day. I then called my boss and told him that I wouldn't be coming to work today, and I explained to him what exactly had happened. He then said that it was all good and hoped that I was safe and sound. After getting off the phone and then walking up to the police officer, I asked him what happened. He told me that they couldn't tell anybody what the situation is and that I would have to find out in tomorrow's newspaper. I said thank you, and I then walked out of the station and hailed a taxi all the way back home. The next morning, I went outside of my apartment front door to grab my newspaper. I picked it up, and what I read on the front page, I felt as if my heart went into my stomach. On Thursday night, a homeless man stole a gun from a gun shop and ran off. Nobody was able to catch him as he ran so fast. Later, he would enter a train station not too far from my station and then would jump on the tracks and run away as witnesses said. He then hid from the police between multiple stops from night until morning, and it was at the station that I stopped around the time that I was on the train that a security guard working behind the surveillance cameras spotted a homeless man on the tracks and then informed the train conductor about this, which resulted in the train stopping for an estimated 2 hours and 30 minutes. During this gruesome time period, the police were called and they kept searching for the man everywhere until the police and us heard gunshots from underneath the train and the cops fired back at the man. He was immediately killed after being shot. It then took a while before the other police and EMTs arrived at the scene and then carried the dead body of the homeless man in a body bag. About 5 years later, I quit that job because I got a higher paying job offer that was in the city and I didn't have to commute all the way down to Baltimore. After this scary incident, I am extremely afraid of guns, and whenever I see one at a store or on TV, the memory keeps playing back in my head of when I heard shots fired right outside and underneath the subway car that I was in. This event happened in late 2004. It was my senior year in high school and I couldn't wait to graduate. I went to a school called Winston Prep, which is located in the Union Square area in New York City. It was a special education school that goes from 6th to 12th grade. At an early age, I was diagnosed with severe ADHD and OCD. Some others had Asperger's or autism, excluding severe autism. I would mostly talk to the people who were like me because we could understand social cues and be more normal than the others. My school never went by grades but rather by disability, and we would have the same learning classes with the same exact people. I would mostly get along with everyone in my class. Everyone in my class was pretty friendly and acted normal. But there was this one guy who was really messed up in the head. His name was Quentin. I always saw him as a weird kid because he didn't have that many friends and he would always stare at people, which included me. But besides that, I didn't really have any problem with him because he was a pretty chill dude, as I thought he was, and I could actually have a conversation with him. There was this one day when my history teacher was talking about the 2004 presidential election because it was coming up, and George W. Bush was running again for president for the Republican Party. And I am not trying to stereotype politics here, but Republicans aren't that strict when it comes to gun laws. Anyways, the teacher asked the whole class, "So, who do you want to win for president? George W. Bush for the Republican Party or John Kerry for the Democratic Party?" When it was Quentin's turn, he said that he wanted Bush to win. He gave his reasons, but his main reason is gun laws. He said everyone should protect themselves if they're armed with guns. He then told the whole class that he owned a BB gun and plans on bringing it to school one day. We all laughed and thought that he was actually joking. And later on in the semester, that turned out not to be the case. One day, Quentin didn't come to class. I thought he was just sick, but I turned out to be wrong. It was 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, and I was already in my second class of the day. The day started off how it usually would, but 5 minutes into the class, we heard the lockdown siren go off. The teachers would usually inform us that we would have a lockdown drill or a fire drill that day before the drill itself. But I knew for a fact that this was not a drill because they never informed us the day before. About 10 minutes into the lockdown, I heard a bunch of commotion outside of my classroom. I didn't know what was going on because the blinds were shut and we weren't supposed to know because a real-life lockdown was taking place. I also kept hearing a bunch of lockers slamming as if someone was getting pushed onto them. After that, we heard the stairway door open, and then there was silence. I would say like 3 minutes later, the principal announced on the loudspeaker that the lockdown was over and that the school would be closing early that day because of our safety. I then exited the school and I turned on my flip phone. I had a flip phone because this was before Samsungs and the iPhones came out. I would have it off during school because I didn't want to get it confiscated and I wanted to learn in school. I got a text from my friend saying, "Dude, this is crazy. Quentin just got arrested for bringing a BB gun to school." And I remember a month earlier that he said that he planned on bringing it one day. Everyone thought that it was a joke, but he sure as hell was not joking. I didn't know what intentions he had with that gun, but logically, it was something not good. I was able to finish my senior year strong, and I am currently an English teacher at a middle school. I don't know where Quentin is today, and to be honest, I don't really care. But I am 85% sure that his life went nowhere to this day. I was a junior at George Mason University in Virginia in 2022. I have since graduated last spring with a degree in musical theater. I stayed another year because of credit issues. During 2021 to 2024, I worked as an RA to keep myself productive. I enjoyed my job at times because I would throw events as RAs could do that, and I would also talk to other residents who live in the dorms. Other times, I would enjoy it. The 2022 spring semester was coming right up, and I moved in a day earlier because I was told to. The next day then came, and people were moving in. It was a busy day, and I was tired of walking around and helping people move in, and I barely got to sit down. Around 3 in the afternoon, a kid named Brandon arrived and was ready to move in. I introduced myself, checked him in, and he was all settled in. But something about him made me feel a little off. He seemed very socially awkward, and I assumed that he was somewhat on the spectrum. But that didn't really bother me. I didn't worry about it too much, and I just helped everyone else move in for the rest of the day. It was now March, and I was having a pretty great semester to say the least. I got a part that I wanted that I auditioned for, made a lot of new friends, and more importantly, I was getting good grades. We would rehearse every day, and one day, a band joined the rehearsals. Once they came, I saw who everyone in the band was. One face that I recognized in that band. It was Brandon, a guy who dormed in the building that I worked in. He was the drummer for the band, and I felt impressed that there was someone that I knew outside of my classes that I would be seeing now regularly, considering how big the college actually is. When we were rehearsing together, he would continuously stare at me. I felt really uneasy, but I would just pretend that I didn't notice that he stared at me. I figured that he must have a crush on me. We were together for, I would say, like a month and a half, and then we had our show and that was that. I was so happy that we had finally finished with that play for 2 reasons. 1, we worked our asses off and now we could have free time. And 2, that boy Brandon won't have to stare at me anymore. I would still have to see him though, because he stayed in the same building as me while working as an RA. It was now late April and there were like 2 weeks left of school. Nothing happened for the next week, but a week later, something happened that never in a million years that I thought would have ever happened to me. On a Thursday night, it was my turn to work as the RA. Nothing happened for an hour, everything was chill, and I was on my phone scrolling through Instagram. But all of a sudden, I heard footsteps approaching me, and when I turned my head up, I saw pure horror. Right in front of me was Brandon. This time, he was completely naked, and worst of all, he was smiling at me. I couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing. I then was sending blow-up texts to all of my friends in a group chat about what was going on. As I was doing that, I then heard another pair of footsteps. It was his roommate Steven. He was running and he begged me not to call the resident hall director. I said okay, and I saw him literally pulling and dragging Brandon to their room, and then they went out of view. I was still processing what was going on, and I decided that I will take a short walk to clear my brain. I listened to Steven and I didn't call the resident hall director. Saturday then came, and Brandon moved out that day. I had to act normal for my job. I saw his dad come to help him move out, and I helped him as well. Although I didn't tell my boss what he did, I did tell his dad. I expected him to completely lose it at Brandon, but he quite frankly did the complete opposite. He assured me that he just has autism and that he isn't harmful. Using autism as an excuse for what he did is unacceptable. Most autistic people would not do that as far as my knowledge, unless you have severe autism. The only thing that I could think of was that he had an episode. I then checked Brandon out, and then he and his father left. I now felt peace as they were gone. I told a few friends what had happened, and they told me something even more devastating. A formal dance took place 2 weeks ago, and I didn't end up going. At the dance, Brandon apparently took pictures under numerous girls' skirts, which included some of my friends. No girl knew about this until one guy told this to every girl who fell victim. I was extremely disgusted to hear this. But I never saw Brandon after this. He either left school or moved to another campus. The scene of him keeps replaying in my head every day, and I had to immediately see a therapist after this. I was so traumatized, but I'm pretty relieved that I didn't see him again, and I would want to keep it that way. When I was a kid, there were a group of us kids that pretty much spent every day of our childhood together. For the most part of it was myself, Chuck, and Billy, and the three of us were like brothers. We did everything together. We camped in each other's backyards and spent way too many hours of our days off together. Billy ended up moving away sophomore year, but beyond that, we literally grew up together, from elementary school through the years we all graduated. And Billy actually came back home so we could all have a party when he and Chuck finished high school. My point with that is that we were inseparable best friends, and we are still in touch with each other. Now, while the three of us were obviously really close, there was a fourth person in our group for a while, and that was a little girl named Katie. Katie had lived in our block for a few years before we met, and the whole time I knew her, it was just her and her dad that lived at that house. He was a single parent, and none of us had met her mother. Katie was my age, so a year older than the other two, and she was nothing short of a bit strange, though we did end up figuring out why when all was said and done. And nowadays, I actually feel bad for how we treated her for being weird. I met Katie when I was around 8. She was, to the best of my knowledge, the only girl in the neighborhood that was in our age range. So when we met, it was pretty obvious that she was going to latch onto our trio. We were 8 and 9-year-old boys, so we were a bit annoyed that there was going to be a girl with us since we were still at that age where girls were a foreign concept. At first, Katie was fine with the three of us though. She was interested in some of the things that we were, and she was willing to play our dumb games. We would sword fight with our toy swords, and she was willing to jump in and take a few hits. And she could actually hold her own. She was interested in animals, so she was willing to help me dig up my yard to look for bugs. Basically, she was one of us for the most part. Except when she wasn't herself. Katie was fine probably 95% of the time. But then, sometimes, she would just be a bit out there. Like she was a completely different person. Those times where she would be different, she would sometimes get violent or angry or just really, really strange. I know that's vague, and I'm not going to get into all the instances where things were wrong, but I will explain a few of them. The first event of note was one day when we were at Chuck's house and we were taking turns playing a game on his Super Nintendo. That was typically something we did once a week, and we weren't allowed to stay cooped up in the house every day, so it was always super exciting for all of us. I think we were playing one of the Mario games, I'm not sure which one, and then it was Katie's turn. Katie wasn't great at the game, but she usually took her losses with grace and just laughed about it each time that she messed up. But not this time. This time she was playing, and she misjudged the jump and then ended up dying. Obviously, when this happened, we all chuckled as we did when one of us made a mistake and died. But she didn't. She had a flat stare and then she stood up, and by the time the game took us back to the level select screen, Katie had literally jumped up and stomped down on the Nintendo. She smashed it with all of her body weight, and while the console was mostly okay, the game ended up bending and snapping in half. Obviously, we all freaked out, and Chuck started bawling his eyes. This Super Nintendo was his pride and joy. Katie then looked over at Chuck and then put her hands around his throat, literally choking him, and she was telling him to stop crying, that he needed to grow up, and that he wasn't a baby, and that if he wanted to cry, then she would give him something to cry about. Billy and I jumped into action, and we pulled her away from Chuck, leaving this whole situation a confusing disaster, and Chuck sitting there looking horrified. Chuck's dad came in to figure out what happened, and we had to explain to him what Katie had done. Strangely enough, Katie actually agreed with our statements, and she was willing to own what happened. She said she was angry and that she wanted to destroy it, so she did. She said that Chuck was crying over nothing and that he needed to grow up. I honestly don't know what really happened after that, because Chuck's dad told us to go home. But I do know that Katie's dad bought him a new game, and Katie wasn't really allowed at Chuck's house anymore after that happened. In fact, I don't think Chuck and Katie really spent any time together after this, for good reason. I don't want to really get into all the events that Katie caused, because this story would go on for ages, but I do want to go over one of the last things that ended up happening, the thing that I think may have actually caused Katie to be a bit odd. This was around a year after the whole thing with Chuck happened. I was on my own that day, and I went out into the woods that were behind our neighborhood. I was out there pretending that I was some kind of adventurer. And who else would I see but Katie? I went over to talk to her, but as I approached, I noticed something weird. Katie was sitting on the ground, her back against a tree, and was eating a sandwich while just talking to no one in particular. I walked up to her to ask her who she was talking to, and when she noticed me, she jumped and screamed that I shouldn't be there. I was obviously taken aback and scared, and I asked what I had done wrong. She then started going on about how I was upsetting her mother, how she was having dinner with her, and I wasn't invited. I kind of just looked around and mentioned that she was alone, that her mother wasn't there. But that was definitely the wrong thing to say, because then Katie flipped out. She started screaming at me aggressively that her mother lived in the woods, that I wasn't allowed to be anywhere near her mother, and that I needed to go home before she hurt me. Again, I was confused, but I just said that I was sorry and that I didn't know. Strangely enough, Katie shifted from psychotic and ready to pounce to almost sympathetic. She said that it was okay, that if I was really, really sorry, that she wouldn't be mad at me anymore and that I was welcome to sit with them. I hesitantly agreed with her, mostly because I will admit that at this time in our relationship, I actually did have a crush on her. So sitting with her was something that I was more than willing to do. Yes, I had a crush on Katie, in spite of her random strange behavior. I sat at one of the trees and I just watched her eat her sandwich and talk. She was talking about school, about all the things that she was going through, and what she was going to be doing that week. She was talking to no one in particular, like she was basically telling her mother about her life. I was a bit curious, so I waited for an opening, and I actually asked her where her mother was. Well, this is where things turned to haunting. Katie looked at me and started crying, like full-on sobbing. I kind of freaked out. I didn't mean to make her cry, so I scooted over to her and I gave her a big hug, and I asked her what was wrong. Katie then pulled away and told me that her mother lived in the woods, because one night, she and her father got into an argument, and her dad hurt her. I will say that we were 10, so this was a whole new thing to me. My parents were always happily married, so I didn't understand the situation of my dad hurt my mom. That idea was just impossible to me. I asked how he hurt her, why he hurt her, and so forth, basically interrogating this poor crying girl. And she stopped crying, pulled away from me, and she told me something that made my blood run cold. She looked me in the eyes and said, "My mom's not really living out here. She's dead. My dad killed her. He killed her and then buried her out here in the woods. I saw him do it. He doesn't know that I saw, though. He doesn't know that I know what he did. He doesn't know that I watched him choke her until she died. He doesn't know that I watched him dig that hole and then bury her. I watched him do it." She kind of started just rambling all of this and shifting between crying and not crying. And looking back, she was clearly traumatized. I honestly think that this is what caused her to be strange and aggressive. She saw this horrifying event and didn't know how to process it. Of course, I told my parents what she said, but being my age, I didn't know what else to do, but I told them what she said to me. Of course, my parents called the cops and they reported what Katie had said, and all of it was this huge mess. The cops ended up doing an investigation, talking with Katie about everything, taking reports from her and her father and asking me about everything. And then they did the excavation. This is where things went from weird to absolutely devastating. They dug up the spot in the woods and they actually did find the body of a woman. Katie wasn't lying or making any of it up. Her dad had actually killed her mother, and he actually did bury her in the woods, which tells me that she really did watch this all play out. To wrap this up, Katie ended up leaving town to live with someone else in her family. Her father was arrested, and all of this was my fault because she trusted me and I told my parents. Obviously, I did the right thing. Her mother deserved justice, and looking back at it as an adult, not telling anyone would have been the worst thing to do. That said, I will never let go of the fact that I changed a huge portion of her life. She was a weird girl, but she was my friend, and I did like her, and because I told my parents what she told me, her whole life changed direction. I never saw her again. And that day where she told me about what happened was the last time that we ever spoke. I never got to say goodbye or anything. I do hope that her life went back to normal after this, as normal as it could be. I hope that she found peace because she deserved it, and I hope that someday she and I can talk again so I can tell her that I am sorry for all the things that she went through. Katie, if you ever read or hear this story, please know that I have never forgotten you, and I mention your name every single time that I pray. Hi everyone, my name is Valerie, and this is something that happened to me a few years ago. Like many young people starting college, I was both excited and nervous. I had gotten into the university that I wanted, but it was a 2-hour drive from my home. Commuting for 4 hours every single day was not something that I wanted to do. So, after getting permission from my dad, I started searching for a place closer to school. For 2 days, I scoured the area, but I found nothing within my budget. Most apartments were too expensive. And finally, I stumbled upon a place that was cheap and conveniently located. The catch? It was near an abandoned hospital. Well, I didn't really care much for that. Creepy or scary places never bothered me. Ever since I was young, I'd experienced unexplainable things, so this was nothing to me. I would also like to mention that I had a boyfriend at that time, and my boyfriend was someone who could see things that others couldn't, if you know what I mean. The first couple of months went by smoothly. The university was great and I loved my classes. My boyfriend and I were comfortable passing by the abandoned hospital too. We mostly walked by it in the morning, maybe late afternoon, or the early evening, but nothing ever strange happened. But one night, my school hosted a pageant. It was an event open to outsiders, so I invited my boyfriend to join me. The activities wrapped at around 2 a.m., and we decided to head to my place. It was a 15-minute walk, and we had to pass by the hospital. I didn't really think much of it, and he didn't too, because we've passed by there multiple times and nothing ever creeped us, spooked us out, or happened to us. But as we got closer to the hospital, a strange feeling crept over me. It was hard to describe. I was about to mention it to my boyfriend when I noticed him staring intently at something. He seemed focused, almost as if he were holding his breath, bracing himself. His grip on my hand also tightened. I tried asking what was wrong, but he didn't respond. When we were near the hospital, he then whispered to me, "Val, walk faster." His voice was tense and low. I did as he said, though I was confused. Something about his demeanor unsettled me. I was about to glance back when he said, No, don't look back, just walk faster." I have always been a bit stubborn, so despite his warning, I looked back. But there was no one there. I couldn't see anything at all. My boyfriend was sweating at this time and we picked up our pace to a jog. He then tried to explain to me and said that a woman was following us. As I mentioned before, I didn't see anyone or anything when I turned around, and that's when I understood that this woman that he is talking about is something that he can only see. He then glanced back and then looked at me. Fear etched across his face. He said, "Run." I had never seen him like this before. He was scared out of his wits, so we ran, sprinting the rest of the way to my house. And once inside, I quickly locked the door and we collapsed on the floor, gasping for air. My boyfriend finally told me what he had seen. He said that it was a woman in white standing near the hospital. At first, he thought she was just a passerby, until she looked up and then he saw her eyes. They were completely black. He knew that something was off, and as we passed her, she started following us. She moved unnaturally, and that's when it told me to run. Even though I continued to walk by the hospital until I graduated, I made sure never to do it late at night. That experience was enough to teach me to trust my instincts and my boyfriend's gift. I learned to respect the things that we couldn't understand, and while I never saw that woman myself, the memory of my boyfriend's fear is something that I will never forget. This morning was the worst morning of my life, and let me tell you why. I woke up at around 7 in the morning like I always do for work. I turned off my alarm, and then I swiped to unlock my phone. After unlocking my phone, I went to my camera app to see if I had any pimples on my face because I was too lazy to go check in the mirror as I was still waking up. Then, I went from 10 to 100 real quick when I saw an image or video at the bottom left on the screen. I don't remember having this on my camera because the last time that I took a photo was 3 days ago, and I remembered exactly what I took a photo of. When I clicked on it, I saw that it was a video. I pressed play, and when I watched this video, I felt as if my whole world was coming to an end. The video shows someone entering my room, walking up to my bed, and then coming right next to me. This person then clearly kneeled down, and it showed my face facing the camera, capturing me sleeping and snoring. I felt like I was going to vomit after watching it. I'm very surprised that I didn't wake up from this. I tend not to be that deep of a sleeper. This person was most likely an intruder. I then walked around my whole apartment and checked if anything was stolen. Thankfully, nothing was stolen. But I also saw that I accidentally forgot to lock my door after I came home, and I felt like a complete idiot not doing this. What person could do this thing? This person just walked through my apartment, came into my room, grabbed my phone, walked out of my door, only to come back and take a video of me sleeping. I texted all my friends asking if they did this just to mess and play a joke on me. But everyone responded with a firm no, and I believed all of them. I felt more of an idiot for not having any sort of passcode or face ID on my phone. I then changed that after eating my breakfast. I then went to my Photos app and checked if this was actually recorded on my phone. I then went to the media type section, and it said that it was airdropped to my phone. I decided that I would not report this to the police because there was nothing that they could really do. After all, I do live alone with no security cameras, and I simply just forgot to lock the door. I then got myself together and I went on about the rest of my day, pretending like it never had happened. I don't know what the intruder's goal was for recording a video of me sleeping and not stealing anything in my apartment. It's very strange to say the least. Maybe they were just trying to scare me and have me intimidated every night. I hope not. I'm about to go to sleep now, and I hope something like this doesn't happen again this morning. This time, I remembered to lock my door. However, I am still paranoid that this will happen again sometimes, and I have a bold assumption that this person never left my apartment and is still hiding somewhere as I speak. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, Don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared because your fear feeds me.